All right, welcome. Everybody can hear me? Everybody can see this? We're good. I mean, I know you can because I've been here for like 30 minutes prepping because that's how nervous I get for making sure we start on time. Because starting on time is the most Dutch thing that you can do. My name is Matthijs. I'm from the Netherlands, very proud to start on time. I would be ashamed to be too late, but I'm also not like bold enough to start early. It's kind of a Dutch conundrum there. Today we're talking psychology, and you never know how many people are showing up, but wow, thank you. Thank you so much. You're not even in the main building. You found your way here. We're going to talk about automation bias. This presentation has a special place in my heart because there's a really good reason that I'm going to talk about automation bias. Automation bias, by the way, we'll talk a lot more about what it is, why we suffer from it, how we can solve it. But in short, it's how we continuously get fooled by machines, and we know about this, and we just keep on going. Same thing goes for me. So I work a lot with generative AI. And I know the dangers of a machine talking to you like a human and us accepting this, but I was bitten by my automation bias a year ago so badly that this is basically me going on tour for an entire year just with this presentation to try and make up for it. Because for those of you who don't know, if you want to speak at a conference, that all starts with answering a CFP, a call for papers. You only need two things for that: a title for your session, easy enough, and an abstract. The abstract is just what you read in the agenda today. So that 2 paragraphs of text, I think, that's all you have to do. But I suck at short-form writing. I can make a perfectly good email. I could write a pretty good article, if I do say so myself. But writing a tweet, can't do it, not for the life of me. Same goes for an abstract. But I work with generative AI, I already said that. So I thought I can do this with ChatGPT, but not the same way the other people are doing it. Right now, half of the abstracts are generated with ChatGPT, and you can tell. I don't think that's a bad thing, because like me, a lot of people suffer from not being able to do good short-form writing. But I thought I'll do it differently. I'll give ChatGPT all my old abstracts that I did write myself, painstakingly, and I'll ask it, you ask me questions. Thought flipping it around would be the trick. You ask me questions, and if I've given you all the answers you need, go ahead, write an abstract. So I get an abstract, and I look at it, and I'm like, yeah, looks good to me. Send it to my co-speaker. He says, yeah, looks good to me. We submit it. It gets accepted. Wow. To NDC Oslo, no less. My first time speaking at NDC, and Oslo, that was a big deal for me. So I go there. This is half a year later, and we sit at a bar. They call it a community event. It was just a bar. And next to me sits Glenn, who is also at the conference here today. And he says, I'm in the selection committee for the sessions. What are you speaking on? And I give him just the first 3 words of my session title, and he says, oh, I know who you are. So you looked today at the agenda, and you saw Matthijs van Veer. You have no clue who I am. There was one person who was told to come here. The rest of you have no clue who I am. So when somebody says, oh, I know who you are, that's a red flag. That's not a good thing, especially not if they're in the selection committee. But still, I'm curious, so I ask him, do tell, why do you know me? And he said, well, the organization has been talking about your session all day on Slack. Because it's so clearly generated with ChatGPT, we don't know how you made it through the selection. That was second red flag. But also, I immediately, of course, countered with, but you're in the committee. I'm here because of you. And he said, no, it wasn't my topic, otherwise you wouldn't have made it. Like, oh, no. I should stop talking. So, to make matters worse, he pulled out the abstract, and he started reading it to what I think were 100 people, probably 20. And the abstract goes a little bit like this. I'll read it. I'll just read the first paragraph. Cringe with me. It says, in an era where technology and mindfulness intersect, the power of AI is reshaping how we approach app development. This session delves into the fascinating world of utilizing artificial intelligence to expedite and streamline the development process of a mobile meditation app. I mark the things that make me cringe now. This was the first time after half a year that I out loud heard what I had generated with ChatGPT, and at the first moment I thought, you're joking, I didn't make that, which is kind of true. But I looked at that a half a year ago and thought, yeah, looks good to me. The most cringy things about this are marked. We'll go through them, and then after the session, look through the agenda of today and yesterday and tomorrow and see what you find. If you ask a GPT model, whether it's 3.5, 4, 4, 0, 5, it really likes to use in an era or in a world when it's about a tech abstract. Same thing goes for delving, by the way, to delve into the landscape. Dylan Beatty speaks at the same slot, otherwise I would have told you to go there, but he made a really good video, Delving into the Landscape, you should look it up, where he talks about the most used words by GPT when it comes to tech abstracts. Delve is in there, it's just, you know right away it's ChatGPT. The rest, reshaping, fascinating world, expediting and streamlining. That's so hyper-sensationalist, you know this is GPT. Sometimes a presentation is just a presentation. It doesn't have to expedite or streamline anything. So yeah, the session went all right, and I'm here at Copenhagen, so I think something at least redeemed me there. But basically, this is my talk about automation bias in generative AI and also in normal programs. But really, this should have been called Matt's Redemption Tour, because I am literally giving this 6 times this year, hopefully, to teach you not to do what I did, but to do better. So, automation bias, topic of this talk, is a form of cognitive bias. And a cognitive bias is basically how we interpret information and categorize that. So whatever is happening here, you hear things, you see things, you read things, automatically you put that into little buckets, and your cognitive bias depends how you process that information. Because we are not rational beings. We are highly emotional. It's better to accept it, because here are just a few cognitive biases. And these aren't even the biases, these are categories. There's about 70 of them. These are things that we suffer from and why we can't be trusted to just be rational. There is no such thing. If somebody tells you, stop being emotional, tell them, I said no. We need that because that's how we process information. However, sometimes that goes wrong. Some of my favorites, confirmation bias. This is universal. If you believe something, you're very likely to then accept any information that shows, yeah, see, I was right. We'll look at this when we talk a little bit about Google results. The logical fallacy, one of the biases in that category is the gambler's fallacy. That let's say we flip a coin 5 times and it's heads 5 times. We want to believe that at 6 times it must be tails, right? Our gut feeling tells us it's 50-50 every time. I know that. But after 5 times, for sure, it has to be. That's just a feeling. It's how we process information. And then we have self-assessment. That's where imposter syndrome lives. I think a lot of people here might suffer from that because you were smart enough to know that you needed to learn more and be here, and smart people do tend to suffer from imposter syndrome. Automation bias sits in false priors, and I will have to quote this from my notes, but false priors are initial beliefs and knowledge which interfere with the unbiased evaluation of factual evidence, and that will then lead to incorrect conclusions. That is what model bias or automation bias is. So informally, it's overly relying on machine-generated decisions or proposals, whether that's something ChatGPT tells you, whether that is the traffic light turning green, anything that automation gives you, produces you, if it's a recommendation or just a signal, we rely on that too heavily. That becomes so normal that we make mistakes. It is, in a more technical term, the human inclination to give undue weight to recommendations or decisions generated by automated systems, even in situations where the information is incorrect or where human judgment would be more accurate. This sums it up perfectly, right? The human inclination and undue weight part, that makes it a cognitive bias. We get information, and we are biased to put it into one of these little buckets. This happens by automated systems, and it's because that last part, that pains me, because if we would have done it without automation, our human judgment would have steered us the right way. And we're going to see that a lot in this presentation. Just to make sure we are talking about the same thing, automation bias is not the same as model bias. When we talk about generative AI, and we talk about any kind of machine learning model, or whether it's a generative AI model, they are biased. They are more likely to go a certain path. This is a technical problem. Automation bias is a brain problem. But just to show you an example, if you ask any image generation algorithm to create an image of somebody writing with their left hand, you're likely going to get this. Very simple fix. You just mirror the image. That is literally easier than trying to get an image generation model to give you a left-handed writer. If you ask for a wristwatch, you may have seen this one on LinkedIn, but I like the example. If you ask for an analog wristwatch showing any time, like 7:15, you're likely getting this. Anybody know why the wristwatch example exists? Exactly. all the marketing images show 10 past 10. And that's the data set that this is being trained on. And we don't label, I think, wristwatch images very well, so you always get 10 past 10. If you ask a marketing expert, they say it's because it's symmetrical, it stays clear of the logo. I'm like, sure. To me, it just looks happy. I think that's why they do it, because this would just not be too nice. But that's why it's very hard to get anything else than 10 past 10. It's easier to just get a wristwatch, take a picture of it. However, model bias and automation bias, they do go hand in hand in a lot of examples. So to give one such example, we're going to talk about the AMS algorithm. Is there anybody here from Austria? One person? You know what this is? Okay, well, be ready for what almost happened. The AMS algorithm was made by Austria's Public Employment Service, and it was supposed to help the caseworker, a government employee, to decide if a job seeker was eligible for some more training. Basically, if you had a small gap to the job market, you could get a pretty expensive training. The bigger the gap, the cheaper the training. If you were a lost cause, no training, just get out. That was a human process. And Austrians are very efficient, so they thought, let's also make a program for this. Let's make a program as a sort of co-pilot that helps the caseworker decide what you are eligible for. However, this suffered from a massive model bias, which became very dangerous because that feeds into our automation bias. The model, after it was done training, is just a number of labels and a score that gets deducted or added. If you don't, I will translate this, don't worry. But basically, every label on the right-hand side has points deducted or added. Simple? What that means is if you enter the room and you are a woman, 14 points deducted. Great start. If you are 30 to 49, 13 points deducted, older, 70 points deducted. There's a couple of beautiful things here. If you have care responsibilities, you have a child or you care for somebody who's sick, points deducted. If you are impaired, doesn't matter what. Your left ear might not be working. 67 points deducted. It's a peak algorithm, this one. There's another pretty crazy one. Oh yeah, you can be an immigrant. As long as it's from the EU, that's fine. But outside of the EU, that's points deducted. Now, there is a group of people, specific group of people, who say, yeah, but it's trained on actual data, so this is reality. However, whether that's true or not, it's still very biased, and it's here to make sure that that reality, which is not fair to some people, stays there. A man and woman walk into a room, it's not the start of a joke, the woman gets points deducted for just existing. Luckily, this thing never made it to production. They started this in 2018, it was delayed in 2021 due to COVID, not due to the protests against this thing, and it never made it to production so far, which is great, because imagine being the caseworker. You don't get an hour to decide if that person who walked in is eligible or not. The machine says, cheap training, and you're like, you know what I think? It's cheap training for you, because you don't get time for it. It's something that we'll talk about when we talk about causes of automation bias. Sometimes they do make it to production. And this was the case in the Netherlands when we talked about the child care fraud assessment. So especially people who aren't that well off but do have children, they are eligible for some money from the government. But governments being governments, they say, well, we don't want you to cheat. We don't want you to commit fraud. So let's make a program that detects the fraudsters. How big the problem was before then, they don't want to say. But there should be an algorithm that tells us who is the criminal amongst us. So they made that, and everyone believed the system worked. So people were labeled as fraudsters. They had to pay back the money. Again, these weren't people that were very well off to begin with, so paying back the money was problematic. They got in debt, they got to go to court, they got to go to jail. Even if they said, I am not a criminal, I literally can show you the papers, we wouldn't listen because we believed the computer. It's automation bias encased in governmental process. This eventually came out to be a mistake, and it made our government collapse. That sounded super heavy when I made this presentation, but that was 2023. The government collapsed again last month, 2025. So that's not a big deal. This is. So the Austrians got away by not releasing it, but we never caught this until it was too late. So this shows that automation bias causes a lot of different errors. These two were caused by model bias as well. But most of the errors that we make because of automation bias fall in two categories. Categories of commission, where the computer tells you something that is incorrect, you accept it and therefore make an error, or errors of omission. Something is missing, but we still try to take a decision and therefore make an error. Throughout the presentation, I've labeled the examples, and most of them end up falling in two categories. It's not as black and white as we like to think it is, but it shows what the problem is. For instance, very easy example, spell check. You're typing there instead of there, and it just fixes it, right? Your phone just fixes it automatically. Did it fix it correctly? Yeah, sometimes, most of the times it does, but you don't catch them all the time. Simple error of commission. It gives you information, your brain says, yep, you corrected something, must be good, continue typing. But you also have the example of, for instance, Grammarly, that will say, oh, hey, you wrote this text, but let me rewrite that for you because it should be more formal. If this was a text to a friend, you probably don't want that, but Grammarly is telling you, wrong, it should be this. And you're like, yeah, I see information, I click yes, and you've written a very formal text to your friend who will certainly respond with, what, dude, what are you doing? You working for the government now? Spell check leads to just funny examples. This is fine, right? The David 19 situation, I don't know what his 18 siblings did, but the pool closed, can't go there. Most awkward thing you can do with this is send an awkward email or an awkward message to your mom, right? But there are examples of these errors that are still funny, but have a little bit more impact. So what happens when your GPS tells you turn right? And you see, I don't know if that's a good idea, there's water there. You probably won't turn right. However, there are a lot of examples of people who've done exactly that. So restaurant staff rescues couple who drove into water after getting confused by GPS directions. And if you think that happened once, you're wrong. That was the US, this was Hawaii by a US citizen. Tourist drives into the harbor, SUV sinks. This person said, yeah, but I saw cars near the end, so I thought there was a road under the water. The cars were on a boat, and they just drove into the harbor. Not the last example. Here we go, just another one. Driver ends up in deep water after following navigation app. They keep blaming the app here, right? It's obviously human error. It is automation bias. But they keep blaming the app. And then this one, this quote I like the most. Driver claims GPS navigation sent him in a lake, so he obeyed. I think this is beautiful. There are tons of examples of this happening. And who knows what happened, right? Maybe it was dark, maybe they didn't see the water. In some cases, they really did, and they just took a right turn or a left turn into the water. The only pattern I see here, it's a lot of US citizens. I don't know why. That country boggles me. They do sometimes take a sudden left turn or a sudden right turn in some cases. So this keeps happening. 1, 2, 3. But that's clearly never going to happen to me when I was writing this talk. Until I saw this picture, which was taken from my car. This is my friend's car. We were driving back from Belgium to the Netherlands. If you've never been to Belgium, they have roads. They have highways. This is not the only option. But as my GPS told me how to get home, we kept going on more narrow and narrow and narrow roads, and I thought, yeah, but the GPS, it knows where I'm going. Until the only person I could ask for directions was the one cow in a field. I did this, right? I didn't go into the water, but I went into the middle of nowhere because my GPS told me so. So yes, I too fell for it. And if I ever drive into the water, I get to do another year of doing this talk, and let's hopefully stay away from that. Generative AI then. Beautiful when it comes to mistakes of commission, where it tells you something and you accept it. I like GitHub Copilot as an example, but also just as a tool. It makes me super fast. Doesn't make me a better developer, but it makes me a very fast developer. And that's exactly where the problem lies. I'm going to give you an example. Who here writes code for a living? Most of you. Okay, cool. So sometimes you ask Copilot to do even the most simple things, right? So I have a string, and I just want to print it out. And instead of printing it out, I write a comment, and then I have Copilot generate it for me. It's just a dumb thing I sometimes do. But then let's say I want to sort that string. I'm going to fool Copilot a little bit, because I'm going to, instead of letting it answer, I'm just going to say, oh, I'm going to make a function for that. And then I'm going to let Copilot fill out that function. And it says, here is code for sorting. Who recognizes this code for sorting? Who recognizes the algorithm? It's bubble sort. Do you know the one thing that bubble sort is good for? No, it's education. You learn how to write a sorting algorithm through bubble sort, and then the last thing the teacher says, never do that again. But what happens, of course, is that these days people make their homework and put it on GitHub, which means it ends up in an LLM. So an LLM has seen plenty of examples of, I don't know even if this is good bubble sort or not, of bubble sort. So you might get an algorithm that you don't expect. But for me, I'll be honest, when I see a multi-line suggestion, I'm very likely to hit tab. Basically, the more work it takes for me to review, the more likely I am to hit tab, maybe even. It's a confession, okay? So you might just say, yeah, let's accept this bubble sort, which is a super inefficient algorithm to sort with. And really, only purpose is to do education and learn how to not write it. Error of commission. The machine told you stuff, and you decided, yeah, let me make an error here. I kept out, this is a non-trigger warning, I kept out most of the massive loss of life kind of issues. Didn't want to put them in this presentation because I don't think that's fair. You came for a fun psychology talk, so we're not going to talk about the worst things. We're going to talk about one case where something almost went wrong. And that's the case of Pablo Garcia. I think this was between 2015, 2018 in the US, again, the US. This boy, 6 years old, lived with a very rare condition that made him very susceptible to infections due to bacteria. It's a shitty way to grow up. Means very frequent hospital visits for him. And in this case, he had to go to the hospital for a routine colonoscopy. As a side note, I don't think those two words should ever go together. There's nothing routine about a colonoscopy, but apparently for Pablo it was. He had to go again for another operation. The doctor goes to him to prepare him for this operation and prescribes a double dose of an anti-inflammation drug, a name that I forget how to pronounce. So you'll have to live with me, but I know it was 160 milligrams. So the doctor says 160 milligrams, and they bring that to the pharmacist. The pharmacist enters that into the system because they don't just go and grab it, they have to enter it into the system. However, the system settings are different depending on the drug. And for this drug, it wasn't just give me the dose, it was the dose per kilogram of body weight. Pablo weighs 38.5 kilograms. So what that's robot, because humans don't get pills out of a wall anymore, the robot goes and gets 38.5 pills. I imagine that's a bowl full. So I imagine it has to zip back and forth to get 30.5 pills. And at this point, you probably think, yeah, but there's no way that that makes it to the patient. Except it did. Now, if you check different sources, some people say the nurse was a junior nurse. Some people say they were a floating nurse, meaning a nurse that just helps at different departments when they're understaffed. But they were not equipped with the knowledge to know if this bowl of pills, or a bag of pills, I guess, was the right amount of pills. There were some doubts, by the way, when this happened. The doctor got an alert on the phone, but the doctor gets 200 alerts on the phone, so I thought, no, not this one. The pharmacist did see some message, but thought, no, I know what I'm doing, right? Nurse takes it to Pablo, and you might think Pablo will not take 38.5 pills, but his mother, super sweet of her, that morning said, yeah, honey, you're probably going to have to take a lot of pills when you go to the hospital. She probably was thinking about 6. Pablo sees 38.5 pills and, well, follows the advice. Pablo goes into shock and was just nearly saved, or nearly, he was exactly at the right moment saved. They were able to stabilize him, which is why I include this example. He luckily didn't die. It's a shitty situation, but it's one of the most well-researched cases of automation bias, especially because it was a lethal overdose, and it involved so many people that it became clear that automation bias has many causes, by the way, but one of the causes is nobody taking responsibility or nobody feeling responsible. We'll go a little bit more into the examples of how that works. But yeah, that's an insane overdose. And who was to blame was also researched. Eventually, the hospital was sued. But the robot, didn't mind. They would definitely say they're not to blame. They were told to get 38.5 pills. They did. So those were mostly cases of commission, errors of commission. We were given information. Based on that, we made a mistake. Errors of omission, where we don't get information and therefore make a mistake, can be a bit harder to find, but one of the examples I like to use is Google. Actually, we find both cases here, but the first case I'll show is, by the way, Google is a very, very good example, because have you ever solved a fight with Google? Anybody? No? Me neither. Because if you do argue with a friend, After about half an hour, that phone starts burning a hole in your pocket, and you're like, I'm just going to look up the answer. And you look up the answer, and you say, haha, I'm right. You see, Google says I'm right. And your friend's like, no, I'll do the same, and they are right. That's confirmation bias. First of all, you entered a query that was likely to get the result that you wanted, and then when you saw the result that you wanted, you thought, see, it was right all along. Where automation bias comes in, and I made this recording for a conference in Tallinn, so you'll see an example from that, that if you are looking for something and you are not very good at Google searches, before you get to the answer might not be on page 1. Actually, it might be a while before you get to the place where your answer, the right answer, is. Who, by the way, if you raise your hand if in the 2 last weeks you went to anything other than the first page of Google? 1, 2, 3. 3 very clever people. I don't do it either. I did it last, I think, half a year ago when I made this slide, and then switched to dark theme to show you that the result was on the second page. We don't do this. But the problem with Google is, well, there's many problems with Google, but one of the problems with Google is they don't give you the most truthful result. They're here to give you the most relevant result. And I just now realized that the slide I made this for is from the conference. The organizer of the conference said 1 person here to add 1 to the room. This is that conference. So this is omission. The right result wasn't on the first page. You're not going to go dig for it. Companies battle each other to make that entry on the first page. And this was, by the way, with an ad blocker on. If you disable your ad blocker and you look for something as simple as, let's go and buy some flowers, this is what you get. First, you get that whole shopping section of companies that paid Google. Then, if you go a little bit below, there are the sponsored ads of companies that paid Google. And if that wasn't enough, you get to the places of companies that paid Google. Google, for the last decade, has not been a search engine. It's an advertisement company. I still use this search engine, but it is an advertisement company. And I don't fall for this, and I have an ad blocker, and most of you will have an ad blocker, but if I think about my parents, and if I think about older generations, they might not get this, and they fall into this trap of, I search for something, the truth should be here, let's go to bloemen bezorgen of bestellen, because they paid Google. What's funny, though, is this was already pretty bad, but Google sort of felt like they were missing out on generative AI. They were just late to the game, so they thought, what we can do is we already have all of these beautiful search results. Let's add the AI overview. I love this. Yesterday, I was sitting next to somebody who was trying to prove something with AI overview. I said, no, almost slapped the phone out of their hands, because that makes no sense, especially when the first results came out, because you could see how desperate they were. A search query like smoking while pregnant, AI overview says definitely 2 to 3 cigarettes per day. Beautiful. This is AI. Taro is a very tough root. How long should you boil that? Well, it could be 15 to 20 minutes, or an hour and a half, or really until it's tender. I don't know. You do you. You figure it out. That wasn't enough, because this is actually one of my favorites. How many rocks should I eat? Apparently, geologists say that that should be 1 small rock a day. I don't know. I don't even want to know what search results based that on. But one of the things that Google tries to do is they don't just tell you what they found. They try to explain it. They try to tie the information together and say, look, this story I wrote for you. My absolute favorite is this one, though. What should you do when your cheese keeps sliding off your pizza? Apparently, in the search results, one 11-year-old Reddit post said, you should just add some glue to the pizza. And I wanna say that people understand that this is a joke, but Elmer's glue is that typical school glue that is safe to eat, so I don't know. I don't know. It was again an American as well. Like, I don't want to shit on Americans, but it was again in that corner of the world where this happened. I was like, I don't know. Google came out fighting. They came out swinging, saying, these are all fake. These are memes. But they did, in the same article, have to say, yeah, except for this one and a couple of the ones on the previous page. Those definitely, that was on us. They were just too desperate to get that AI overview out, and this is what happened. The mistakes are less worrisome, but you still see a lot of AI overview mistakes that don't match the results. There are other search engines that do this better, by the way. That's because of a crucial mistake where they try to explain the results rather than just saying, here's the results. But there is a whole different area where we don't use AI, where we completely fool ourselves, and for software developers, this happens almost every day, and this is when we start writing our own tests, which is fine. We should do that. Let's write tests. But when you test for something, that's what you're going to look at. So let's imagine that you think that 100% unit test coverage is a great idea. It's not, but let's imagine. And your QA engineer says, I keep getting reports that the software isn't working. And you look at your 10,000 tests and say, well, obviously it is. I see nothing but green lights here. And then the service desk keeps calling, like, no, it's definitely crashing. Something is wrong. And you keep looking at 10,000 tests, maybe write one more for good measure. No, it's working. But what you were testing was functionality of little bits, but when it all came together, the whole thing crashed with a 10-second delay. Nothing ever got done. This is a silly example, maybe, but how many times don't we do that? We write a performance test that is a load test, but under a stress test, it would fail. We write tests to see integration tests, but we see nothing about how the whole system performs when actual users use it. You keep staring at the automation you build. You're fooling yourself with the automation you build, and I think that's lovely, I think, as a human. So another thing, this is one where I had to really stress a little bit, because I wanted you to show an error of omission, so something that wasn't on the screen, but done with generative AI. That's difficult because generative AI is very chatty. It likes to give you more information. It will even gladly make stuff up. But then I remembered, when I give a GitHub Copilot training, there's a very specific case that I always show where GitHub Copilot, even today, even the versions we use today, will get it completely wrong. So come with me and become, once again, if you've been there, the intern. New, your first company, people around you so much smarter than you. You're amazed by all these people who know how to code, and you've only done bubble sort. Customer service says, I click on this button, the whole thing goes down, the whole thing crashes. But your super senior team lead looks at the issue and says, oh, it's very simple. It looks like a very obvious mistake in the do stuff method. I changed the method name, but this is a real thing. The do stuff method. And he assigns the intern saying, have at it. So me, the intern, no knowledge, but GitHub Copilot says, I'm on it, let's go. So opening that do stuff method, you, as seasoned software developers, will see what is wrong there. There's an obvious error, right? If you call do stuff, you call do stuff, you call do stuff, you call do stuff, and if I kept repeating this, you'll walk out, and that's a Stack Overflow exception. It's a very simple error, very simple to fix, or well, it's easy enough to fix. So let's go to Copilot. Let's say we didn't know what the mistake was, and we say, just select this, Control-I, inline chat, fix the obvious error. Copilot is so helpful. And it says, certainly, to fix it, just change the lowercase d to an uppercase d. And it changes that on 2 lines. I'm super proud because I've now fixed the most obvious error in this file. Commit it, and my team lead got angry anyway. This is an error of omission because the right answer would have been, hey, you've got this recursion error. We'll fix the naming error as well. It didn't do that. Especially inline chat is trained to just keep to a short answer, just fix it, go do it. That's it. That's what it does. This is a very simple mistake of omission. But if you don't know, and if this was multiple lines and you're not really sure what you're doing, this happens. And I don't think it's silly to think that a lot of people are using GitHub Copilot this way when they're told, hey, obvious error over there, and just go, okay. If it's obvious, the stupid machine can do it. So that's 33 minutes of examples before we finally dive into why is this a problem? Why do we suffer from this? Why are we so very fragile as humans? All of this comes from research papers, but that doesn't mean all of it is super helpful, just social aspects and accountability. But this is actually a very important one. Because if we look back at the Pablo Garcia case, who was to blame there? I still feel the doctor was to blame, because you do expect that they are in charge there, but they're not. Because they handed over to the pharmacist. The pharmacist may have gotten some pop-up, but decided, no, I know how this works. Maybe it was the developer of that system that just changes the way that the input works per medication. But nobody there was truly accountable. And I don't think that's very far from how we run a lot of software teams. Got some devs, got some people doing operations, some QA engineers, Scrum Master, Product Owner. You want to say that team is responsible and accountable, but then if something needs to be fixed, it might be a different team. I think a lot of corporations also just run this way. Who is responsible? Yeah, no, the company. That's a legal entity. That's not a person. Who is responsible? And in the case of the Pablo Garcia case, it was the hospital that was responsible. Again, that's a legal entity. if you work in an environment where accountability isn't felt or shared or really, you don't have to be punished for a mistake, but at least we need to know where it comes from, it's very easy to make a mistake. It's very easy to accept a mistake when it comes from a machine. This was also proven by an article or a research paper that you may have heard about, because the title was this: Your Brain on ChatGPT, Accumulation of Cognitive Debt, blah, 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 blah. You will have likely seen this on something like LinkedIn, because everybody misquoted the article as saying, ChatGPT makes your brain rot. Look, the paper says so. Paper didn't say so. You can read it. It shows a lot of other interesting things, though. And one of the interesting things that it showed is it had 3 different groups where they had people write essays. So one group would just write an essay without any tools, just hands on keyboard, let's go. Second group got to use search engines to look up information and use that in the essay. The third group got to use ChatGPT. And what they found is that when it comes to a sense of ownership, how much is this essay my work, the people who just used their brain felt that this was an extension of them. This was their work. They were either proud of it or not proud of it, but that came from an emotional place. This was their work. People who use search engines still felt that they had put in all that work, but a little less ownership. People who use ChatGPT, I think you can imagine, they didn't feel that that was their work. Maybe they were proud of how they prompted it, like I was with my earlier abstract work, but they don't feel that ownership. And ownership and accountability and responsibility, for me, that really comes together. So not feeling like this is your work opens you up to that automation bias. When I write something with GitHub Copilot, I feel it's almost ephemeral. This could just be tossed away and I'll make a new version of it, which is great, but it doesn't mean I feel like this is mine. This is the biggest contributor to automation bias: task complexity and time. When a task becomes more complex, we feel more pressure, we open ourselves up to errors when it comes to working with machines. Or when the same task needs to be done in less time, and I think we've all been there, you can feel that pressure building in your body, you are also likely to make more mistakes. Your cognitive capabilities literally go down when you're put under stress. The problem with this is when you start thinking about the tasks that we like to automate, it's things that are difficult or take a long time. So this becomes sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. We start automating the difficult and the expensive and the things that take a long time, and in doing so, we completely mess up and open ourselves up to that automation bias. So yeah, a bit of a problem. Because I don't remember, I wasn't there, but the Industrial Revolution promised that we were going to be saved so much time. Humans in the future would work 2 hours a day and we would only check the work of machines. That never happened. I'm still working 40 hours plus to do more in the same time. But now also think about what the people who sell LLMs are telling people now. We should make agents, because that will save you all time to work on more creative tasks. I don't think they mean we're going to be outside painting. I just think they really mean we need to do more work in the same amount of time, opening us up to more automation bias. So this is really a really difficult one to tackle. And if you have the answer to that, let's talk after, because I don't know how to combat this. I have some ideas. There's one that one paper mentioned, but I did want to include it because it does give some insight in how you look at the world. So quoting from this paper, it says that people who suffer from neuroticism, which is characterized by emotional instability, irritability, anxiety, self-doubt, depression, and other negative feelings, suffer less from automation bias. There's something in those negative feelings that switches on that critical thinking, and you're more prepared to battle that computer to say, no, you're wrong, because I also believe that I'm wrong and everybody's wrong. Having suffered from anxiety, I hope that gives me some plus points in fighting the computer, but as you've been at the intro of this presentation, doesn't always work. There is another one that I really like, though. That same paper showed that extroverts suffer more from automation bias. And I know I'm standing on a stage here, but after this, I'm going to take a nap, because this is too many people for me. So I like to think that that at least gives me a few more plus points when battling that automation bias. So yeah, who you are as a person influences this bias as well. So let's fix it. The 3 things that I thought that would fix this was also the 3 things that early research showed. Now, that could mean I'm super smart. Or it could be that these 3 things keeping a human in the loop, increasing system accuracy, or just training people are the right answers, but it's not, it's wrong. So before we go into the real fixes, let me tell you why this is wrong, because you hear these a lot. But research shows that keeping a human in the loop, it doesn't work. It doesn't make you suffer less from automation bias. Automation bias is a human problem, remember? So keeping a human in the loop solves one thing, and that's legal cases. If you become responsible for the software that somebody else makes, then you're liable. We're going to sue you, not the people who made that software. It solves one thing, legal issues. Yes, I believe that humans should be the ones taking decisions, but that doesn't mean that this solves that automation bias. If anything, it can make it worse. So human in the loop, every time you hear that, just think legal issue and nothing else. That doesn't solve it. Higher system accuracy, by the way, is the equivalent of saying, hey, I've got software with bugs. Have we tried making software without bugs? Because I think that would be a really good idea. Higher system accuracy does lead to less errors, but it doesn't fix that automation bias, right? You make mistakes less, but you still suffer from that bias of trusting the machine. So when it does go off the rails, it's still you. So that doesn't work. This one, though, I wanted to believe. Certainly, if you train people to use a piece of software and you tell them this software is wrong so often, they would steel themselves against that bias. No. Research shows that when you show people how something works, they start thinking, I know how this works. Even if that knowledge is, this machine gets it wrong, that knowledge gives them that bravado of thinking, I know how this works, and they actually make more mistakes. There's one thing that really sucks for you as well, is that research shows that even explaining to a group of people how automation bias works makes them suffer more from automation bias. So I'm sorry. I will try to fix this in the next slide. But training is not the answer. What is the answer? One of the most important things that you can do, you, software developers, is if you build a system that shows any kind of output, show metrics, and show them the right way. Can you say that that machine is going to be 10% likely to have it wrong? Show it, big, bold, neon letters. That's what you should be doing. Because that triggers that part of our brain that says, oh, this is about a patient. I should probably be paying more attention. And that helps, but we don't do that, even though metrics are available. This is ai.azure.com. You can see for every model, you can see the metrics and how accurate and grounded they are. The only problem is you can't say for one example, one response, this is how likely it is to be wrong, but you can say it for the model. What do the big AI peddlers do? This is ChatGPT. This. That's not the same. And if you start a new conversation, that's not even there. This is not showing metrics. This is saying, do your homework. And if you ask my teachers from back in the day, it's not going to happen. I found this because I was looking for it. Copilot, and this first screenshot is from a preview of agent mode. That one at least says it's powered by AI, so mistakes are possible. Check output carefully before use. Nobody finds that. Today I thought, did they maybe change it? They did. They made it worse. So the people who are trying to sell you AI and have access to the same research are saying, no, we're not going to do that. Because ChatGPT wants to be the biggest website in the world. I think they're on number 3 or 4. So they only have Google and Facebook and Instagram to deal with now. So they are not incentivized to say, hey, we're like 20% likely to be wrong. They're not going to do that. So think about the people who are trying to sell you this. They are not incentivized to help you with this. Metrics do matter. So if you make something, please include it. And I'll show an example near the end. What also helps is the 4 eyes principle. And we all use that because we're all software developers. We have our work reviewed by someone else. Turns out that this really helps. It even made it into the AI Act for another thing, but there is a really important caveat to this. If you make something with GitHub Copilot, for instance, and you make a pull request, and you send it over to people you don't know, the big board of reviewers, you are very likely to accept mistakes in your own work because you don't know them. Again, going back to that emotional part of you, you don't really care what those people think of you. You don't even know them. But if you send it to a teammate, you're more likely to put in a little bit more effort. Actually, look at the diff maybe this time to see if you didn't put that console log in that you promised you would remove. You are less likely to make mistakes when something is checked by somebody you actually know, which is really cool. The 4 Eyes principles, like I said, made it into the EU AI Act for critical systems. And I thought, yeah, critical systems, so that's going to be like infrastructure and stuff. No, they did a actually pretty good job on this. For instance, education and vocational training, when it's about AI systems that determine whether you should be eligible to a certain level of training, Austria's AMS, you should have the output and the whole system monitored by at least 2 people. That's nice. It's a little bit human in the loop, but at least now it's 2 humans who hopefully also know each other and check each other's work. So that does seem to work. Another thing is self-criticism. Yeah, it's hard to switch on. It helps when those metrics are there, right? If you wake up tomorrow morning, when you wake up tomorrow morning, don't worry, and you say, today I'm going to be very critical of myself and check all the AI output, you'll forget by breakfast. So this is hard to switch on, but it does help. And one of the ways that we can enable that is through metrics. Another one is that if you build something, again, making a plea to you, software developers, offer information, don't offer explanation. Generative AI is so good at explaining the work. Seems almost human, but that's where most of the mistakes happen. Google's AI overview makes mistakes because they try to explain the results. And I think it's DuckDuckGo that has a similar thing, but they don't explain the results. They just say, this is what I found. Go click. Go on. Go. Look for yourself. If they combine that with metrics, I would use nothing else. Information, not recommendation. If you can do that, you're helping humans consume your software better, helping other generations of people who might not understand that that's not a human talking to them on the other side, suffer less from automation bias. A thing that you can do. Another thing that's hard to tackle, like I said, task complexity and time, just give people more time. If you try telling your manager this, they don't buy it. But it is something that you need. It's part of a very normal work culture that you actually have the time to do the job that you were paid to do. And having a little bit more time to do something removes that pressure. Again, that tangible feeling in your body of, I need to decide now, goes away, and that can enable that critical thinking. Otherwise, that part of your brain is just not on. It's in fight or flight mode. Back to human in the loop. So human review, unless it's that 4-eye principle, it doesn't really work. But we are seeing results in scientific papers that says human overview, so being able to check the entire working of the system and reviewing that over time and making changes, that does work. So not just going through the individual cases, but also looking at tendencies, seeing where there are biases, human or otherwise, that does seem to work. This is also something that the AI Act prescribes for some cases. It's a dense piece of work, so you'll have to read through that yourself. This is me offering information, not recommendation. This is one you're going to have to look at yourself. And one that I have been keeping out of this presentation, but what I do firmly believe is that if you improve the work culture, which there are plenty of books about, but it's hard to do, you do make everybody around you suffer less from automation bias. If you feel psychologically safe to look at something and say, ah, that's wrong, you're less likely to make mistakes. You're less likely to accept that. But if you are continuously pushed around, you might not even register that mistake that is so clearly on your screen because you know nothing's going to come of you saying anything about it. So this is something that is super important, but it doesn't have a clear turnkey solution. If you do like to learn more about this, watch for the recording of yesterday's sessions by Arthur Dohler. Brilliant speaker, did a whole thing about psychological safety and how you can actually make some changes. And I think his title was How Not to Strangle Your Coworkers. So I watched that yesterday. I will be looking at that again for my coworkers. So I've learned a few things in doing this. And like I said, this is my redemption tour. So I still generate abstracts with AI, by the way. I just do it a little differently now. First, I fell for my own bias and decided that I will just build a tool to make abstracts with. And then I changed it to incorporate the learnings. But I have a GitHub project. This is public. You can look at it. You can clone it, or you can fork it, enter your own LLMs, and it just works. You'll see a couple of things that might seem familiar. Hey. But this is how I now make abstracts. And they're getting accepted. So at least I know now that they're pretty good. Nobody's shamed me for them yet. What I do now is something went wrong. No, you can't. You need the interwebs. I know the password to this, because it's not a very good one. But there is just to make sure, oh no, they changed it, because it wasn't a very good one. I ended up making a tool for this. So it is still automation, but it outperforms ChatGPT by quite a bit, just because of what I learned. There. This will go just fine in about 3 seconds. First, see the other one. Who here does like writing short-form text, tweets, abstracts? Anybody really good at it? Anybody learned how to write stuff? No? See, this is why I automate everything. Come on. There we go. So everything I built for this is just GitHub. It keeps getting better. It's just GitHub. It all works with GitHub Actions. Nothing about this is running locally or in a console app or anything. No APIs built. Just this. I am connected. Doop, doop. No. OK, what it does, you get a GitHub issue. And that GitHub issue asks you 4 questions. First question, who is this talk for? Second question, what are people going to learn here? Third question, what will they be able to do when they walk out of the door? And then the fourth question is just a 2-sentence summary of the talk. And that doesn't have to be polished. It could be anything. The LLM will take care of it. So what happens is you get an issue. Don't refresh this page. There we go. With the questions and answers. So here you have those 4 questions. These 4 questions, by the way, I got from Arthur Dohler. And basically, if you can't answer these questions, you have no business writing an abstract. Stop, go back to 0, and then think about what you wanted to do in the first place. But if you do have the answers to that, it generates a pull request. What it does is it does a couple of things. If I click on this tab, this will break, so I won't. But I promise you, the abstract is behind the changed files. The first thing it does, it makes that file, creates a pull request, and then starts a number of things. So the first thing it does is just offering information about did the answers on those questions make it into the abstract, just to make sure that nothing was left out. Just to make sure if one of these wasn't in there, it would show a big red X saying, hey, this was not in. And it doesn't fix it. If there's a problem, it doesn't go and fix it on its own. The second thing it starts running is this. I mentioned a YouTube video by Dylan. He has a whole list of words that suddenly started appearing in abstracts when ChatGPT came out. Words like explore and delve. So this thing, this version still uses AI. I have a version that doesn't. Will just detect, hey, you used delve, you used explore, you used inner world, that kind of stuff. Again, it doesn't fix it. Earlier version of this would also go and fix it, but that is, again, that problem where you know an LLM can do it, but that's where you go into recommendation rather than information. Information is, I found these words. You, human, go fix. I made a few more changes that also detect N dashes and M dashes, because ChatGPT just drops them in anywhere. It's a lovely form of writing, but it's very easy to see that something was written, not by me. And it keeps my style very well, because I still use my own examples. But here is one of those things that nobody does. Warning! Couldn't make it bigger than this. I think it's big enough. I can't say for this one result how likely it is to be wrong, but I can say that for this model, for O, we have accuracy, how likely it is that it can reproduce facts from its data set, and groundedness, which is how likely is it to keep to context you give it, which in this case are my answers, questions, and the example abstracts that I've given it. So I can do this, I can explain it, I can show, and this is not an LLM, this is just me typing and copy-pasting from Microsoft Learn, and you can Microsoft Learn more about it if you go to this link, and hopefully that will battle that bias a little bit. This works really well, because if I wrote a tool that checks if your abstract was made with ChatGPT, it's putting this all together, and these days, like 50% of conferences, you can see that they did that. This one is undetectable. Again, I don't mind if you write your abstract with an LLM, case in point. But just, I would hate for it that in 2 years, every abstract looks the same, that same hyper-sensationalist abstract style that GPT will throw at you. And this is sort of what I try to do, and why I'm still allowed on stage, basically. Because I can't write I can't write. So what I did, I tried to trigger that critical thinking by giving me those questions. If I can't answer these questions, I shouldn't be doing this. I shouldn't be writing an abstract because I've missed a critical part of what I need to be able to do here on stage. I need to know what I'm teaching you. There's no time pressure because this I can do on a train, and then by tomorrow I'll check the work, or there's no time pressure at all. I try to give information rather than recommendation where I can. It does still write that abstract, but I never change it based on other rules. I try not to tell the model, don't do this, don't do that. I try to push it to where I want it to go, and then the review tasks just say, you may look at this, look at that, and I make those changes because I can edit. I just can't write. I show those metrics. I think those are super important. Don't just write, oh, it's AI generated, check your work. You're not going to do that, but if you have a big warning sign, at least for me, that is a good reminder of, oh yeah, I don't want to have to do another year of giving this presentation. I want to do something new as well. And then the 4 eyes principle. This is a GitHub pull request. I can share this with anybody, and they will just be able to review it for me. Of course, it is still automation, but it does outperform ChatGPT, which is pretty cool. But it is still automation. But I am still a software developer, so I'm going to keep automating stuff until the world burns down. So in conclusion, a lot of the things that I've mentioned on how to battle automation bias, they're not easy to do. Just improve work culture. Just do more critical thinking. It's not hard to do. This is not the end. What really is clear to me is that this is one of the 72 biases that we suffer from, but at least for this one, we have some answers that we can use. Give people more time. Right? Give people those metrics. Offer information, not recommendation. But why this is really important is because big tech has told us this year, and from now on, is the year of agents. We all have to make agents. Who has made an agent already? Oh, that's more people than I thought. I gave this presentation too late. Chances are that you're going to have to make some as well. And it's cool technology. I hope that when you do, you will keep in the back of your mind that you're letting text generators decide business processes, and maybe you could do a good job at explaining that to users with some of the slides in this presentation. So if you have any questions, if you find me in between these buildings or in these buildings, just grab me. I will answer any question you possibly have. You can email me, go on LinkedIn, check these awesome papers. I have more if you want. But that's my session. I hope you enjoyed it, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.